Welcome to the Navigating Business Decisions video series. I'm Grace LaConte, and I'm sharing some videos to explain a report that I created based on a project with students at Kent State University, where we interviewed and surveyed business leaders in Northeast Ohio. So if you want to check out the entire report or a two-page summary, you can go to my website, laconteconsulting.com/ohio-survey. So today is the 17th video in this series, and I'm going to introduce some of the appendices and resources. As you can see here, this is the 8th section in the report. I wanted to provide some useful practical resources that could take the information that we learned from this report, from all of the feedback and the positions that other leaders are using in order to achieve their goals, and to make that into more of a consumable format for you as a leader or owner yourself. In this appendix section, we have several different items. We have first a business resilience checklist, which I'm going to go over in this video, then a business resilience scorecard, the survey questions from our survey, a word cloud visualization for both all of the answers that were provided and for only the open-ended questions, and finally resources for further reading. In the process of gathering all this information and looking through the responses from the 53 different business leaders who filled out our survey, there were some themes that came up, and we reviewed that through the previous videos in this series, which you can check back, and make sure to subscribe if you want to get more videos like this. But I thought it would be really useful to provide a method to make sure that your company is also moving toward the same achievable, measurable goals as the business leaders that we surveyed. So there were certain themes that came through, certain ways that a lot of these companies are operating in order to make sure that they are making decisions that align with their business goals, that their culture is being communicated properly, that their employees are given options that would make them want to stay, and the turnover would be lower. So I decided to create a checklist of different points based on what we learned from this study, so that you can see whether you are achieving these things or not, and where you might want to focus on improving. So first of all, this checklist is a way to identify gaps in the current way that you are running your business and current practices compared to, as I said, the best practices that we identified through this study. And then you can prioritize your plan for how to address these gaps, and then decide how to implement them, whether you're going to use a variety of different methods or do them one at a time, or involve your leadership, or do it on your own. And then also how to measure your progress as you make these improvements. So here are the sections in this checklist. First of all, we have actionable decision making. Implement a structured decision-making framework to reduce reactive choices. This is one of the themes that we saw definitely in the survey results as well as in the interviews, that reacting to situations as they are happening, especially emergency and critical problems, is very likely to lead to outcomes that are not as ideal. Kind of makes sense. If you don't have a plan in place, if you haven't really prepared for challenges and problems, then it's very likely that you won't have the resources you need at the time that they occur later. So it's a really good idea to structure your decision making in a framework that would help you to plan ahead and have resources available and a path through that, so you can have a more resilient outcome. So I do have links on this page, and again, you can find this in the entire report. The checklist has links to other resources that can give you more information. So the second point in actionable decision making is use post-mortem reviews after major decisions to refine future strategies. I always recommend post-mortems to my clients, and I do them on my own projects. Basically, it's a way to go back and ask yourself how things went, what went well, what didn't go well, how can we improve? What would you change for the next time? While it is a simple concept, actually applying this in your business can be quite challenging. So this is a link to some more information about how you might want to consider adding postmortems into major projects or other other touch points throughout your company's life cycle. So I always recommend it after a major decision, or if you're looking at planning for future growth or changes in your business, that's a really good time to look back at how things have occurred already. Then ensure financial decisions factor in both short-term needs and long-term value creation. This is where sometimes an outside expert can provide more insights than what you may have available in your business. Although a lot of companies have very qualified staff who are doing the day-to-day projects and probably even financial forecasting a bit, sometimes it can be difficult to see outside of the normal frame of reference. And so bringing in someone with outside expertise to provide an objective point of view about these decisions can be really helpful. But if you don't or can't do that, still considering what your decisions will impact in terms of the short-term problems that you're facing, as well as how you're going to achieve those long-term goals eventually, is a really, really good way to make sure that those financial choices are going to align as a whole and not just make changes that would have a short-term benefit, but also a long-term benefit as well. Fourth, consider evaluating progress with a business year in review. So again, this is hyperlinked. I've been conducting year in review evaluations, and I wrote a series on how you can do that in your business, what to do if your year was a disappointment, which happens frequently actually, where you expect things to go a certain way and they may not, and also different aspects of how to evaluate both your business and your professional or personal life, because those can actually integrate a lot when you are an owner. They tend to cross paths quite a bit. When you are looking at adjusting your company and even evaluating whether you want to position it for a sale or for a handoff, it's a really good idea to go back and look at how things have been working in the past and what you might want to adjust moving forward. I've met a lot of business owners who've never conducted a year in review of their business, and I find it really exciting when the leadership team is able to work together to consider all of the great things that happened in the previous calendar year, all of the maybe not so great things that happened, but what they have learned and how they plan to adjust for the future. It's a similar process to the post-mortem, except that the year in review also takes into consideration everything that happened in that year, not just a single set of events related to a major decision. So this is a really good practice to do, and you can publish this. You can obviously create a version that's more outward facing. I do recommend that owners do this for themselves every single year, and even if they don't share it, it provides a lot of information that they can then use to adjust their decisions moving forward. The second section is enhance long-term planning. Implement a business continuity plan to maintain operations during unexpected events. If you don't have a plan already for what happens if a catastrophe were to happen to you or to other key leaders or key personnel in your company, then the chance that your business will be negatively affected if and when that does occur is high. So the continuity plan would have to do especially with how you would continue running business operations regardless of any key factors changing, such as access to resources, key personnel, operations. There's so many different ways that you can look at this, and there's some wonderful plans out there that are examples, depending on what industry you're in. But this is something so important to put in place ahead of time, because there are catastrophes that very few people expect and can alter the course of how a business is running, and sometimes even shut it down. And of course, we don't want that to happen. Develop potential owner exit strategies to maximize business value and legacy. As I've mentioned in previous videos, many owners are resistant to creating an exit strategy. I believe that is partly because of a fear of giving up control, and also partly because they haven't quite defined what their identity would be past the point of being the owner, the person who is called on to do everything, the person who has all the information, the wisdom, the knowledge. But unfortunately, when you keep that in your own head, that creates not just a bottleneck for operations, but also a potential liability for the business value itself. because a business does not have value unless the value can be transferred to others. Since we cannot plan for when a business will need to be sold, I mean, we can put some timelines in place and some, like, there's no crystal ball that says exactly when a business is going to need to be handed over. And there are circumstances outside of anyone's control with health or emergencies or shifts in the market or financial difficulties that could speed up the process of an owner being kind of forced into a sale or a handoff before they feel ready. So this thought process is not very pleasant. It can actually put you in a better position to maximize the value of what your business can offer to others, because you are then creating a path for all of the knowledge that you've acquired, all of the components that depend on you as the owner or the leadership team as a whole. You can actually start to offload that slowly over time so that there is no jarring shift to trying to force someone else to take over. And also you get to control how your legacy is handed to others as well. I have found that a lot of business owners, yes, they do create businesses and they run businesses because of the financial benefit, but at a certain point, there is more that they'd like to leave to their family, to those that they've impacted, more than just money. And money, of course, is a very tough subject, especially for individuals that have a hard time with it. I go into that in something called transaction avoidance syndrome, the fear of offending people if you charge too much, or using money as a manipulation tool. There can be many other factors that cause even successful business owners to hold back from creating a legacy and a next stage of their lives that would not only benefit them professionally, but also leave the business in the hands of people who could be trusted to take it even further. So these are really hard questions. It's not just about selling the business. There are so many other considerations with the legacy concept that have to do with your philosophy and your beliefs, your core value, how you've set the business apart from other companies. And of course, when you get into valuation, that has a lot to do with the market positioning and a marketing strategy, which is really tied into how the business owner has viewed the business and set it up to succeed. There are a lot of different factors at play here, but the most important thing here is that you are not afraid to step into this difficult conversation. Next, build cash reserves and diversify revenue streams to mitigate financial risks. Something that came out of the survey very strongly is a focus on trying to avoid a high amount of debt and to create cash flow that continues to be an asset and that is not as much of a problem month to month. So improving that stable source of revenue and also having enough on hand, especially when prices are going up and costs just become so difficult to overcome without as much revenue coming in. But there are still ways to create more cash flow, and diversifying these revenue streams was another very important theme that came through our survey. It is possible to diversify by considering options that you may not have thought of before. Sometimes these ideas for creative revenue streams can come from foundational staff, which is people who may not have had any decision-making capacity, but who are employed in positions where they might see things that the rest of the leadership team is just not capable of seeing. So I highly recommend that you consider some strategies to get to the place where you have more cash reserves, and that you are considering at least some additional ways to diversify that revenue stream so you aren't dependent on a single or just two sources of revenue. Then the next one, conduct periodic risk assessments to identify operational, financial, and market vulnerabilities. Many of the vulnerabilities in businesses that I review are not quite clear to the business owner. Some of them are very obvious. Some of them are clear to even people outside of the company, but many times there are risks that are only able to be identified through an assessment because it's more systematized. So if you have a good way to evaluate things, even if they're not clear to you as the owner, that becomes very helpful. Then finally, secure key person insurance to protect the business from leadership disruptions. We spoke earlier about this continuity plan, and we talked about some other ways to stay solvent in case something tragic happens. This is a very, very helpful thing to put in place, especially for individuals without whom the business could not operate in a healthy way. Next section, employee engagement and strategy. Develop a leadership pipeline to prepare high potential employees for key roles. You may already have this in place. Next, invite employees to provide feedback on cost saving and process improvement opportunities. Now, something that I always caution people about when they try to create pathways for discussion from employees is, first of all, if you've done this before and it has not gone well, I commiserate. I do think there is a way to gather employee feedback without creating such a, almost like a feeding frenzy where everybody is offering all sorts of ideas and they get all excited and they think that change is going to happen rapidly. And then over the next few weeks or months, when changes don't happen, it can lead to frustration and employee disengagement. If they're promised that something will happen and then nobody is following through, that can actually lead to the reverse of what you were trying to achieve. So I've also seen examples where cost-cutting measures were a priority. I was in one company where they actually rewarded anyone who could come up with cost-cutting strategies. It was almost like a competition for employees to think of all the ways they could cut costs. But what this led to was a form of cannibalization where different individual employees were trying to outdo each other with ways to just cut costs across all sectors without much consideration to the long-term impact of what that could do. And you can imagine how that could really negatively affect a business. Cost cutting alone is not the only way to achieve higher profits. In fact, sometimes it can hurt the business if you're cutting the wrong things. So there are definitely some ways to gather feedback in a more thoughtful way and to create a sense of appreciation for what employees are offering without giving them so much control that you are actually hurting the business in the meantime. And finally, conduct regular stay interviews to proactively address retention risks before they occur. If your company doesn't already have an exit interview, which I highly, highly recommend, even though they are very uncomfortable, those can provide a lot of good feedback. But unfortunately, the employee is already mentally out the door. They have already chosen to move on to a new situation, and they're most likely not going to be providing the same type of quality feedback because they don't care quite as much about staying and engaging, and they're not very motivated to continue to help the company. So a stay interview would be something that's done routinely. This can be part of a regular review, but it really should be more of a conversation in both directions. The employee should be encouraged to provide feedback about how the company is handling things and how they might suggest making changes to improve that. And then also the employer can be asking for ways that the employee might be somewhat unhappy. This gets touchy because obviously employees don't want to risk losing their jobs if they are too honest. But this can be designed in a way that both protects the employee and supports the company's need to get feedback before they lose a valuable employee. I have definitely seen that employees, when they leave, they're taking with them a tremendous amount of knowledge and industry information and potentially answers to problems that you may not even be aware of in the leadership team. So not only are they assets while they're employed, but those assets are just, they just disappear, they evaporate once that employee is gone. I think that more employers could be gleaning and benefiting from the knowledge that employees currently have if they create these pathways to engage with their employees before they leave. The final section on this page is align culture with strategy. Establish clear decision-making authority at different levels to avoid bottlenecks. And I mentioned this, one of the things that we heard in the survey was that bottlenecks, especially at the top leadership level, and especially with owners or the C-suite who maybe have been burned in the past and so they don't want mistakes to happen, but they kind of force decisions to go through them, and that creates an enormous and very painful bottleneck where not only is information stuck as it goes through the channel to be approved, but also it tends to discourage other decisions from perfectly capable leaders throughout the rest of the organization. So you can create a a structured approach for decision and provide other leadership levels with permission and the authority to make those decisions with certain understanding and confines, of course. But if you don't have a system like this in place, I highly recommend reviewing what is possible for your company. Second, regularly review how company values align with customer service and reputation. This was another theme that came up in our survey. The company values, we found, often are not translated into daily operational tasks and tactics. So the discussions in the boardroom about strategies and plans and the vision for the future can be completely different than how work is actually being done on the factory floor or in front of customers or with whatever service or product you create. This mismatch can actually weaken your position and your reputation in the market. Next is conduct culture audits to make sure values are consistently reflected in daily operation. I define a company culture as not just the surface things of what you notice from the outside of what you can feel from within the organization, but also all of the kind of the iceberg concept of everything else that is not said, the expectations, the philosophies, the belief systems, the language that's used internally. There's a lot that happens in a company that no one really defines. You have to kind of learn it as you go. So if this is not clarified and you aren't sure what is causing people to not be long-term customers who stay, or causing employees to have high turnover, or just in general creating a lot of frustration within the company, then it can be helpful to do a culture audit to find out exactly what is happening and how this could be affecting your bottom line. Then preserve institutional knowledge by encouraging documentation and collaboration between experienced staff and newer hires. It's so important to capture as much of this knowledge before your employees leave. Even if they're newer, even if they may have had a very low position in your company, I guarantee they have knowledge that could be of great value to your company if it were captured and documented. And the documentation part actually is one of the keys to creating value, long-term value that can then be transferred. If documentation is not happening, then there is no consistent way for these tasks, these processes to occur, and that can actually weaken your position in the market because you can't necessarily, you can't quantify your progress, and you may not be able to ensure that the same process happens the same way later. And passing on information between experienced staff and newer hires, these are all keys to making sure that you have a culture that aligns with the goals for your business. The next section is streamlining operations. Identify production or service delivery bottlenecks and implement process improvements. Most likely you have been doing this, but there could be additional ways of dealing with this, especially if you're seeing some signs that this is not going well. Standardize repeatable processes to reduce inefficiencies and control consistent output. Are there ways that certain processes are not done in a repeatable, standardized way? Most likely. It is possible that companies could have extremely efficient internal processes and operations, but from what I've observed, humans tend to get used to what they're surrounded with, and we kind of get lulled into a false sense of security. So sometimes having an outside person come in and observe this can lead to insights that you didn't even realize were happening. We tend to be kind of nose blind to what is happening inside our own company, and until somebody else objectively can observe and point this out, it's hard to notice it, but it could be affecting your business anyway. Regularly audit technology tools to ensure alignment with operational goals. Most likely you are using some type of technology. Are you sure that that technology or those software systems are the best for what you're trying to achieve? Are you sure that those systems are working as well as they can together? Do you have an IT manager who is trying to find ways to become more efficient in the use of those technologies? Again, a very common problem that I see in many companies. It's easy to get used to the way things happen rather than ensuring that you're actually as efficient as possible. Next, evaluate whether outsourcing or automation could improve profit margins. We saw this topic quite a lot in the survey results. The outsourcing is a very common one, and fortunately or unfortunately, it is part of doing business because sometimes the costs to outsource are cheaper than keeping things in-house. But I have been seeing a huge shift actually in bringing a lot of operations back in-house, a lot of services. So that can increase your need to have qualified staff to do those tasks. Automation is also a very sticky topic, especially in manufacturing. There are pros and cons to doing this quickly, and I always recommend looking at all of the options before you just jump into it. So automation can also provide incredibly beneficial outcomes, and it can improve profit margins, but there can also be a lot of costs to it, not just upfront, but the cost to employee engagement, the cost to losing valuable workers who have been there for years who just can't adapt and may not feel like they're part of that discussion. So important to check to see whether there are other ways that you can acquire more tools and technologies and improve the profit margins. Then finally, provide team leads with authority to manage daily decisions and focus on strategy. This will help to become more efficient just because when they have the permission to make choices and not be hampered by those bottlenecks at the very top, your team leads can actually create much more streamlined processes internally, and especially if they're documenting those and there's a process to encourage documentation and repeatable processes, this can lead to a much more efficient system without the need for a huge change internally. Then we have enhanced customer-centric practices. Identify your most profitable customers and develop retention strategies tailored to their needs. You may have already been estimating and looking at profitability scores, perhaps with certain types of customers and products or services that you sell. A good question to ask, though, is how clearly are you evaluating your most profitable areas? And again, this is something that an external objective person could potentially provide a lot of information that may not be super clear from inside the company. Some customers are profitable because there's been a long-standing agreement and they're just happy to pay a higher amount. But other profitable areas could be customer segments that you may not have explored much, and it may not be until you do this type of evaluation that you even know, oh, we had a huge profit margin from this one type of customer, but it was a one-off. So we just didn't think of creating a whole second revenue stream from that type of customer. So these are ways that you can use data to identify even more ways to grow your business. Next, provide foundational staff with decision-making authority to resolve customer issues quickly. I always recommend that foundational staff who may have no authority or no decision-making capacity generally have some of the best knowledge of how the business is going. Are you allowing employees who may not have supervisory capacity to make their own choices based on the tasks of their job description? And how quickly can they fix problems without having to go through higher channels? If there is a way to determine whether employees are trustworthy and can be relied on to make these choices, that can create a lot more streamlined decisions and better customer outcomes. Gather customer feedback regularly to adapt products and services to their evolving needs. Not only did we see this through the survey, but I've definitely observed it in companies that I've worked with and just in general in the market. Customer needs change quite often, and their expectations are changing very rapidly as they see so many more options to solve their problems. It may be time to review what is possible that could still meet their changing needs and ways that your company can serve those needs and solve those problems in the best way possible. That will help to set your company apart from all the competitors. Next, consider key customer segments to uncover untapped markets and new revenue streams. We talked about this earlier, but there are a lot of ways to evaluate whether you are potentially missing customers who you may not have normally worked with in the past, but who now could be in a perfect situation to need your services or products. And also untapped markets that may not have made sense in the past, but now you can position yourself to solve those needs. Analyze competitors to refine pricing, service offerings, and customer experience. What are the other folks across the street doing? Is the grass greener over there, and why? Pricing is one way to, of course, stay more relevant and to try to get more customers to your side, but that's definitely not the only way. I always recommend looking at what value customers say they get from your services or products. What is it that they say it's solving for them? And how can you package that in a way that would provide even more perceived value, even if it's a higher price point? Even if it takes a little more time, if you're charging more, but you're giving them more value than what they can get from competitors, that is pretty much a perfect opportunity for them. Rather than trying to chase down the discarded customers that other competitors can't help, or going to the bottom barrel pricing to try to stay in competition, I personally recommend going for the higher end and looking at how you can add value rather than trying to just lower your price. Explore innovative growth opportunities. Review underutilized assets and intellectual property for monetization opportunities. Are there things that you have developed or your team has developed and intellectual property that you can then control and own? Are there things that you could provide as another revenue stream to license to other companies? Potentially a training method or an invention or products that you can have the intellectual rights to. So many opportunities there. Evaluate potential niche opportunities for new or improved business growth. This is, again, something that we did see through the survey, but I personally have seen so true in a lot of businesses where when they become more specific on how they solve problems, they can actually increase their market share and value rather than being so broad that they pretty much take any customer for any reason. Then test new products or service ideas through small-scale pilots before full investment. Most companies are already doing this. If you haven't done this for a while, it can be really exciting to see how something new does in the market without a full development cycle. So if you try out new pilots and see how they do, you can actually use that as more marketing material to get your customer base more excited. Consider strategic acquisitions or partnerships to accelerate growth and market expansion. I've seen this go well. I've seen it go not so well. I've seen entire companies fail miserably after an acquisition, and I've also seen some beautiful partnerships that have just taken off and created even more value for everyone involved. The key here, in my opinion, and based on the feedback, is you really need to evaluate your own goals and diligence of making sure that you know what you're getting into is way more important than the potential for losing that opportunity. If they are truly a good partner or acquisition for you, they will be patient enough and upfront enough to share all of the dirty secrets that they're bringing into this relationship with you, instead of trying to hide it until after the contract is signed. So if you're feeling some resistance or you're not seeing the full scope of what the partner or acquisition member could offer, it may be a good idea to put this on pause or even delay this process, even if it means losing the opportunity. Because again, I have seen so many situations where rushing into this kind of decision can be extremely unpleasant or even dangerous to the existing company. The final section here is measure success and performance. So first, define key performance indicators, KPIs, for each department to track progress and results. I'm a big believer in KPIs. They're super helpful. And if you know what they are, you can actually put your staff in the driver's seat of making sure to collect and check on those every single week, month, quarter, however often you're looking at them. Next, set up early warning signs of financial distress, such as declining margins, shrinking pipeline, etc. Depending on what your company's focus is, there are not just key performance indicators, but also signs that things are starting to really take a downturn. For example, if you have lost a key client, or even some smaller clients, if you're starting to see fewer sales at a certain point in the month, if your costs suddenly jump up because you have run out of a product and you need to order a lot of it at once, these signs can help you to make better decisions for the rest of that cycle instead of getting into a situation that's hard to get out of. Establish financial health checkpoints to track profit leaks and cost overruns. I like talking about financial health coming from a medical background, the health of a business, it happens whether or not you're aware of it. So similar to your body needing certain systems to run properly, and of course there are many ways that you can improve your health. Same with a business, there are many ways to improve it. There are a lot of things that can hurt a business's health. So these checkpoints are ways to kind of do little evaluations throughout the just to make sure that you are still on track to achieve your goals. Then you can also hold quarterly strategy check-ins to adjust for shifts in the market or operational realities. I really think quarterly is a good frequency because then it gives you time to adjust before the next quarter happens. Review alignment between leaders' core values and the company's culture and goals. We did see this quite a bit in the survey, that the core values of the business at the top leadership level is often not the same values or beliefs as people in the rest of the organization. And this can be a very big deal, especially when it affects customer engagement or future planning, or even employee engagement. If employees are hired and there is no check to make sure that they're aligning with the company's overall culture and goals, that can lead to some really unfulfilled employees and potentially some bad outcomes for the business too. And finally, encourage reverse interviews where employees can clarify and openly discuss problems. If your company is open to hearing what your employees have to say, which I hope you are, and I'm sure that as a good leader, you want to hear what employees honestly think about the business, then this can be a way for employees to ask leaders for their opinions. And this can happen in many different modalities, but I generally recommend not doing this in a town hall meeting because that can have some pretty poor outcomes because it's a large group. I think that this is best when employees are selected with a variety of people from many departments, and they can conduct small-scale discussion interview styles with leaders. And obviously, leaders have to be willing to hear what employees have to say and really make a commitment to want to make adjustments based on what they're hearing, and not just give lip service to saying that they hear and understand and then nothing changes. That's one of the worst things that a company leadership team can do, is to promise things and then never have anything change. So I hope this was helpful. This again is a checklist of the concepts that we found through the course of surveying 53 different business leaders in Northeast Ohio, as well as interviews with 7 of those leaders. And these concepts are ones that we think would be of most value in improving your decision making as a business leader yourself. So if you want to find this checklist, you can go to laconteconsulting.com/Ohio-survey. And if you like this video, you can subscribe and like and leave a comment about questions or any other comments that you want to share. Thank you so much for tuning in.